Whoa, hold on, hey, hold on, cut the track. This isn't right, stop, hold on, stop the music. Let me get the right music on. Ah, there we go, much better. So, before we even get started, I've got some splaining to do. After all, last episode, the Snatcher one, I had said, and I quote, "I promise that I'm going to try my hardest to keep a better upload schedule from now on." Real funny stuff considering that I released that video 7 months ago. So you're probably wondering, Wolfclock, old buddy, old pal, what on earth have you been doing these past 7 months? Well, unlike last delay, I actually do have some good reasoning behind this episode's unprecedented delay. To start off, I put myself up to the task of locating and archiving every available Hat in Time development video from 2012 all the way up to the release of the game. And then from that, I thought to myself, hey, if I've got 2 archived builds of the game and all these archived videos, why not make an archive of everything I could get my hands on? As a matter of fact, why not create an entire community with that specific intent? And so, a Hat in Time Cut Content was born. With the special help of all my comrades on the Hat in Time Cut Content community, we've been able to archive hundreds of screenshots and photos, dozens upon dozens of development videos, and even a few newer things along the way. Did you know that Hat Kid originally looked like this monstrosity? You did if you were around back in 2012. Or how about this monstrosity? Or perhaps this PTSD-ridden Hat Kid? Most importantly though, because of the community, I've been able to learn some things that I did not previously know. And I'd like to take a moment to say that this episode of Betafied would in no way have been possible if it weren't for the Hat in Time Cut Content community. I'd like to thank everyone who's helped me make this possible. Thank you guys so much for everything you've done. The archiving and analyzing would never have been possible if it were just me, and I owe you guys more than I can give. Thank you so much. Now, I hate to move along so fast, but I've got quite a few things in store for this episode. So sit tight and buckle up. We're going to be taking one last, long look at the Subcon Forest. So, first things first. What is the Subcon Forest? Well, the Subcon Forest is the 3rd chapter of the game. However, throughout development, it was the 2nd chapter of the game. I won't go over the reasons again. If you'd like to know more about it, you can take a look at Betafied Episode 1, where I discuss the fate of the cut character known as the Moonjumper. Anyway, on to the topic. The importance of the Subcon Forest being the 2nd chapter of the game is how early in the game's development it was conceptualized. Prior to the concept of a dark, creepy forest, the original Chapter 2 is much more obscure in terms of its theme. The earliest mention of the 2nd chapter of the game comes from a Eurogamer article published November 16, 2012, in which is written, "Additionally, Hat Kid can, in Chapter 2, Act 1, tell a dressmaker to make her a dress and deliver it to another location, and when Hat Kid arrives at that location, it's ready for her." This is an era of development that we most commonly refer to as the City of Calcite and Adventure era of development, as one of the first, if not the first, music tracks to be composed for the game shares that name, and some early articles and descriptions refer to the initial development stage that is seen in many old screenshots and videos as such. The idea of the Subcon Forest came about soon after the City of Calcite and Adventure became what we know as Mafia Town, with the introduction of concept artist Shane Frost onto the development team. What we have now as a Subcon Forest in the final game, as well as what the Subcon Forest was during its development, can pretty much be chalked up to Shane Frost's fun box, with the environmental theme as well as the characters such as the Fire Spirits, the Snatcher, the Moonjumper, etc., all being created by Shane. As a matter of fact, the Fire Spirits cutouts were lifted directly from one of Shane's pieces of artwork. The initial setup for the introduction of the Subcon Forest was much different than what we have in the final game. Originally, the game was going to be much more linear in terms of chapters, and from what we know, the player was going to literally be taken from Mafia Town to the forest by a character known as Tim's Friend, who was, of course, also designed by Shane Frost. So, who and what was this mass of what almost appears to be dripping ink, with a cattle skull for a head and a giant eye in its stomach? Well, according to commentary by Jonas Karlev, Tim's Friend was going to be the imaginary friend of the also cut character Tim, the CEO of Time. Both of these characters will be a major topic of discussion in a future video. From what you need to know right now, by some means, Tim's friend transports Hat Kid to the Subcon forest from Mafia Town at the end of the first chapter. Following Hat Kid's arrival in Subcon, one of the first creepy characters that she would have met would be the Snatcher, a character that we not only managed to see in the final game, but has now got himself what's almost an entire DLC dedicated to him and his contracts. This early Proto-Snatcher, however, as you may remember from my last episode, is much different than the final game counterparts. No need for great detail about things, but in essence, Proto-Snatcher was more of a snatcher of things than a snatcher of souls. And in the original storyline, one of our first interactions with him would have been him snatching and stealing all of our timepieces that we would have collected in Mafia Town. Here, you can see what the original dialogue was. Presumably soon after, we'd be introduced to everyone's favorite cut character, the Moonjumper. Also, side note, we do in fact have confirmation from multiple developers that the Moonjumper was indeed Queen Vanessa's prince up until he was cut from the game, so go team! Anyway, in addition to what we've already discussed about this character, we have some new introductory lines from the Moonjumper recovered from one of our, unfortunately undistributable, so don't ask, builds of the game. Oh, hello there, young child. You just forget about this guy. He gets a little crazy sometimes. You should come visit me in the forest later. I have some good stories to tell. Unfortunately, we don't know where the Moonjumper would have said this, as despite the naming of these lines, we know what he does inside the village, and it's not something that involves light-hearted chit-chat. We'll go into more detail about this later in the video. While we're at it, we also have some unseen lines from the Snatcher using the beta of the game. He says as follows: I would say, oh, I apologize in advance for what you're about to hear, but to be honest, I had my fun with this. Here's what I think the Snatcher would have sounded like if he were to have said these lines.
Oh look! A pig in a blanket! All trapped and ready to be eaten! Ha 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 ha! Tell you what, you want one of these? We've got a bit of a, game going on in this forest. You see, my friends and I are playing Capture the Flag, and I need some help capturing some flags. There's a small village not far from here, and if you manage to capture the outhouse near it, I'll let you keep the timepiece. How about it, sport? That's the spirit, and if you had said no, you wouldn't have had any spirit at all. Ha ha ha! I like your spirit, and you're lucky I'm letting you go with yours untouched. But hey, if you randomly stumble upon a small village, you have my permission to give it your all to get rid of its outhouse. Toilets are yucky. Good luck, trooper. Oh, and if you see any paintings around here, bring them to me deep in the forest. I'll take care of them.
Have it be known that I hurt my throat and had to stop recording for an entire day after those lines. Anyhow, rather conveniently, it's written right in the text exactly what the situation for this event was, as well as what the first act of the forest was going to be. Unlike in the final game, the Toilet of Doom was originally going to be the first act of the chapter, and we conveniently have not only textual evidence, but photographic proof as well. One last thing. I'm sure you all remember my video about Mustache Girl in Subcon. Like, it's my third most viewed video at 8.1k views. Now, I'm sticking this in here because presumably it was part of an interlude between chapters 1 and 2, since Mustache Girl mentions that she thinks Hat Kid probably hasn't made it to the Subcon forest yet. Well, there was a cut sequence involving Mustache Girl meeting the Snatcher that would have been used in this act, and although the current release of the game no longer has the lines, reverting back to version 1.0 of the game gives us the following conversation in the localization files. Now, I'm not sure if you can tell, but I'm not a girl, nor am I a giant demonic entity that steals souls, so instead of trying to do a readout of this conversation, I'm just going to show it on the screen. One more thing involving Mustache Girl in the Subcon Forest. It appears that instead of chasing one of the Snatcher's minions like you do in the final game, Hat Kid would have originally seen what appears to be Mustache Girl and would give chase to her instead. This animation was, up until the recent updates to the official website, seen as a background video for the Subcon Forest, and had been there since between September 10th and 15th of 2015. Among other things, it is worth noting that we can see a different code water surrounding the tree, a mafia about to be sucked into one of the cursed paintings in the area that would later become the Burning Forest, and the side of the rock that 2D Snatcher is going to be on. We'll get into more detail about that last part much later in this video. It is also worth noting that one of the cube maps used for the Subcon Force in the final game does show that Mustache Girl was indeed going to be nearby the tree. Anyway, that about wraps up what information we know about how the chapter would have begun. Now let's move into what it was going to be about. Throughout the game's development, the story of the Subcon Forest remained the same up until the beta of the game. Originally, the forest was a split battle for power between three individuals, the Snatcher, the Moonjumper, and Queen Vanessa. As shown earlier, the Snatcher was to say that him and two others were having a bit of a game going on in the forest, stating that was capture the flag, although I unfortunately don't have any evidence suggesting that there were any actual flags or flag capturing of any way. We obviously do have what the Snatcher was talking about in the final game. This, of course, is the Toilet of Doom, which we have an old model and some of the old music for. We'll get more into the toilet later. For now, let's take a look at some of the remaining assets from this Battle of the Forest era of development. Although there's not too much left over from what I know of, there is one thing that's used in the final game as a backdrop which seems to relate to the creatures of the forest. Although they're quite difficult to see unless you climb to the top of Snatcher's tree or you no-clip, there are three large towers all scattered around the forest. In the final build of the game, two of these towers are colored and themed, while one appears to be cut and, as I've noticed, almost reminiscent of a crescent moon, a symbol that was quite often used for a certain cut character that we all know and love. Anyway, thanks to some members of my Discord, we have saved and archived the livestream from Gears for Breakfast developer Haboy, who had conveniently gone into detail about these three towers during his developer commentary. I'll play the clip for you all now.
Alright, so there's a reason I came up here, obviously. Not just for the relic, but someone asked me if I can just do it. Nani, what the heck is that? So on, I don't know, I guess, was it dev commentary or something? I talked about these towers, right? And I said I had these ideas for towers that represented the Queen Vanessa and the Snatcher. But they were just plain towers at the time. And I don't know if you've ever played Dark Souls 2, but look up the tower in that. That is literally the tower from Dark Souls 2. I was just borrowing that for inspiration. And then Jonas was going to cut these, I think. So I was like, hell no, you're not. So I made them look really cool. Gave that one a fire theme. Yeah, Hyde's Tower. And yeah, look it up, Raz. You'll recognize it. And then this one's snow theme. So then for the final tower, you're probably thinking, well, what the heck is that? And in terms of lore, like my personal lore, let me try and remember what it was. So if you had the Ice Kingdom and then the Fire Kingdom, then there must have been a third kingdom. I felt that was my thought process. I don't know. I guess for some reason I assumed that the woman who we built the flowers from was from a different kingdom or something. So I think that's why I did that. So a lot of people think that signifies the cut Moonjumper, but really that was more just Vanessa taking out her rage on the kingdom of the woman who she thought the prince cheated on, basically. But yeah, I guess you could take it to mean that the Moonjumper was cut as well, but I honestly didn't care that much about the Moonjumper. The Moonjumper was pretty lame.
Okay, well, I guess Haboy doesn't necessarily believe the same thing as I do, but he did say that could be interpretation of the third tower. And between you and me, I think that's good enough. It is worth noting that all these towers in question find their homes and locations close to where their given characters were to be. The Ice Tower is located above the cave that houses Vanessa's manor. The Slice Tower, which, may I add, is labeled in the editor as sub_moon_tower, and is also a full model in the editor as opposed to a sliced half tower, is located behind the Ghost House and Giant Teacup where the Moonjumper was originally going to be, and the Snatcher's Tower is above the swamp. With this, it's also worth noting that early renditions of Subcon did not include the swamp, just more forest. Furthermore, the original 2D Snatcher was going to be on a rock located just about below where the tower is in the final game. You can actually see where the Snatcher was located in the alpha release trailer if you squint hard enough. According to developer Haboy during his developer commentary livestream, he had originally placed a group of flowers where the rock had been removed, but the flowers have since been removed by a different developer. Originally, the Toilet of Doom was going to be a much different boss than what we got in the final game. Unlike its final game variant, the Toilet of Doom, at least in the prototype and alpha, was going to include a large puzzle in order to access it, followed by a much more crude boss fight. Thanks to members of my Discord, we have the animations of the original toilet along with the animation names. Spawning the actor for the Toilet of Doom in-game gives us a toilet with an idle loop with, let's call it bad chocolate coming out of it. Coming in contact with this will damage Hat Kid and coat her in it. You can probably guess why this was changed in the final release of the game. Anyway, aside from the boss battle itself, we need to go into detail about how one would have faced the boss in the first place. In the prototype, the Toilet of Doom was going to be the first act of the entire chapter, according to an unused clock model with the title Act 1 Toilet of Doom, found in the alpha build of the game inside Hat Kid's unfinished bedroom. Returning to the developer commentary video by development lead Jonas Karlev from 2013, he had stated the following.
So, there's actually a puzzle here, but I can't unfortunately show it because I know a lot of you care about spoilers.
Thankfully, we have some hints as to what the puzzle may have been about thanks to more recent findings, and although I don't know all the details, I know enough that we might be able to piece together what the puzzle in question may have been, at least in the later stages of development. So, what exactly could this puzzle have been? Well, to figure that out, first things first, take a nice good look at this here graffiti. This is in the final game, so if you were to find this treehouse that it's in, you can take a look at it for yourself. Neat, huh? Now, for those of you who don't know all too much about the cut enemies of A Hat in Time, allow me to explain what you're looking at. This thing right here is what we commonly refer to as a light plant. Why do we call them that? Well, in the prototype, alpha, and early beta of the game, light plants were a Deku shrub-like enemy that got its name from the brilliant light it would radiate from eating fireflies. We'll get into greater detail about these later in the video, but right now, what you need to know is that these were some of the more common enemies to be found in the Subcon forest during its early stages of development. They'd be seen on top of houses in the village, as well as being the most common enemy to appear inside the Snatcher traps that we had gone over in the last episode. In the alpha of the game, they had 3 different actor names that could allow them to be spawned at various sizes. Hat_enemy_light plant, Hat_enemy_light plant big, and Hat_enemy_light plant very big. Visually, these 3 all use the same model, and their only changes are the size, health, and damage. Unfortunately, due to how Unreal 3 works, using these for the spawn commands will only spawn the actors, which means they won't have any AI and won't attack. However, if one was to use the command summon hatintimegame.hat_forest trap and walk forward, they would be greeted to a fully functional Snatcher trap, complete with battle music composed by original composer Eric Gleiser and several fully functional light plants. So, why am I bringing up these Snatcher traps again? Well, as it turns out, them, along with the graffiti, both had something to do with the puzzle in order to battle the Toilet of Doom, according to developer Haboy during his developer commentary livestream.
I don't know if you know, but those decals were used for the toilet boss at one point, where you would have to fight a bunch of enemies inside fawned arenas, and then those decals would light up on the side of the toilets, and then eventually he would wake up, and then he would be like, "Who dares, wake me up," sort of thing. So that's that. There's footage of it. You could probably ask the booth about it if you really want to. But that was that.
I was only able to locate 2 of the decals throughout the forest, but the second decal is rather interesting. Instead of a light plant, this decal on the treehouse next to the double-decker one shows a blue image of a mafia. If these decals were used in conjunction with Snatcher trap battles, then we may actually have footage of this one specifically. as this blue Mafia decal was most likely used for the Cosmic Mafia that was seen in the Chapter 2 trailer circa 2013. I have a question for y'all. Let's talk about Timmy. Now, I know that's not a question, but let's do it anyway. Timmy! No, not that one. That's Tim, not Timmy. That one. Kind of. It's an updated model, but it works, I guess. So you're probably wondering, what does the cut co-op partner have to do with Subcon? More specifically, what does the cut co-op partner have to do with Queen Vanessa? I thought we already covered just about everything in the last 2 episodes. And yes, we've pretty much covered everything there is to cover about Queen Vanessa herself, except for a few details which I'll plop in a minute or two. But what you most likely did not know is that, at least for a period of development, Timmy was going to be not only a character, but an antagonist stationed at Queen Vanessa's manor, according to the Steam Greenlight page for the game. I actually had to confirm this with some developers in the now deleted Ask the Devs channel on the official Discord to make sure that this wasn't some kind of mistake. And sure enough, there was a portion of time where Timmy, as in the Timmy from the co-op, was going to be a character in Subcon that would meddle with Hat Kid. I'm not too sure about what it meant by living mansion, but according to some developers, there was going to be a quote-unquote upside-down portion of the forest as well. Unfortunately, I don't really have any idea what was meant by this, but I have a feeling it may have had something to do with the living mansion idea. Now, there's one last thing we can take a look at regarding Queen Vanessa, and that's the cut 3rd floor. We went into excruciating detail about the 3rd floor in the first 2 episodes, so let's keep this short and sweet and take a look very specifically at some stuff that we have not seen. Take a look at these screenshots from Haboy. See all those spooky eyes? Absolutely startling, yeah? According to Haboy, before the 3rd floor finally got the boot, there was a period of time where Haboy was planning on reusing it for some sort of new puzzle that didn't involve Snatcher Kid getting in the way and screwing things up. There are some conflicting reports about this, though, because there's also some reports that this was just part of Haboy's ARG prank he did for Boot Troop. Unfortunately, both reports of this being an actual thing and reports of it being part of an ARG come from the same person, the developer. So we may never know, unless he comments and answers it himself, but the likelihood of a single developer watching not 1, not 2, but 3 of my videos is extremely low, so we're just going to leave it as probably a feature that got axed due to time constraints and move on. One of the most notable changes to the Subcon Forest in terms of gameplay is the vast number of enemies that were cut. Including variations and updates, there were a total of 6 enemies that didn't make the final cut for various reasons. The light plant, the pink plant, the yellow plant, the big plant, the rough patch, also referred to as bush cat, and the shram. Getting started with the earliest of the bunch, the light plant is seen more than any other enemy throughout the game's development. In both the alpha and beta builds of the game, the light plant can be found in time rifts, although from what I can tell, the actor itself is mostly deprecated by the beta build of the game, as it doesn't appear to attack most of the time. In terms of gameplay, the light plant got its name from the glowing flies it would eat that would make its bulbous head glow some sort of bright color. When in this charged glowing state, it could then fire beams of energy to inflict damage towards the player. When in close range, the light plant had 2 different forms of attack. It could either attack by biting at the player, or it could do a spin attack where it lays itself flat and quickly spins around before returning to its idle state. One more piece of gameplay that's not seen anywhere but is in the animation set is their digging ability. It appears that light plants were at one point able to dig themselves either up from the ground, dig themselves down into the ground in order to avoid being attacked, or use the grounds as a means of attacking. Unfortunately, I've not a clue which of these it may have been. However, judging from how many enemies in Subcon are very sneaky, with the spiders in the final game jumping down seemingly out of nowhere, the headless statues disguising themselves as regular statues only to attack when the player turns their backs on them, and several of the cut characters that we're going to discuss having stealth aspects, it's safe to assume that the digging animation was going to be used when the light plants would dig themselves up in front of the player and reveal themselves. Another interesting thing about the light plants is their varying sizes. As stated earlier, the light plant could come in a small, large, or incredibly large size, each of which have their own amount of health to accompany them. In terms of the Snatcher traps that one could encounter the light plants in, they would spawn in different sizes at complete random. Another interesting thing about these sizes is that the largest one, when defeated, instead of just flying off, would turn into a large blob of purple particles that would slowly fall and wither to nothing. As an added side note, by the way, I'd like to mention that when I first saw this particle effect as a kid, I was absolutely amazed, since I had never seen anything like it before. Anyway, in terms of why the light plant was removed from Subcon, despite having been in the game since prototype days all the way up to the early beta, I hope you're all ready for a disappointing reason, because that's what you're gonna get. Although developers had given mixed reasons, usually just saying that they weren't a necessary addition to the game, or that they disrupted gameplay, or that they were removed because the game moved from a hack and slash to a platformer, the real reason, from what we can tell, was because there's a bug in the game wherein which attacks sometimes won't damage Hat Kid if she's standing still. That's most apparent with the light plants. Indeed, in testing with the alpha build of the game, attacks that clearly contacted with Hat Kid will oftentimes just not damage her at all. It's unknown if this affected the later versions of the plant enemies as well, but would come to no surprise if they were cut for the same reason. Moving on from the light plants, we have the pink and yellow plants. These enemies appear to be identical to light plants, but much more toned down and with much more stripped abilities. They only have 3 animations each, with one being for digging, one for attacking, and one as a general idle animation, suggesting that the spin attack and shooting attacks were completely removed at this point in time. Both the yellow and pink plants appear to function completely the same between each other, suggesting that their only differences are in terms of looks. As a noteworthy fact, the pink plants are seen in multiple screenshots from late development, with one of these screenshots being on the Hat in Time Steam page. From this and the fact that pink plants have grass by their roots, while yellow plants have rocks or dirt by them, we can deduce that the yellow plants were most likely to have appeared in the burning part of the Subcon forest. Since this part of the forest is on fire, and is therefore much more run down than the rest, the dirt by the plant's roots instead of grass would make much more sense. Adding to this, the yellow-orange color that these plants have is much more fitting to the burning area, as they would be much less of an eyesore among the orange fog and burning trees than their bright pink variants. Of course, this is all just speculation and theorizing, so I could be totally wrong and they could have appeared next to each other at random throughout the forest. Who knows? Moving forward to the last of the flower-based enemies, we have the big plant. From what I've been told, we don't have any scripts related to the big plant, so we can only assume what its gameplay was going to be based off of its animations. This plant enemy comes with 4 animations: an underground idle animation, an animation for emerging from the underground, an above ground idle animation, and a running animation. From this, we can judge that it would most likely emerge from the ground and chase Hat Kid. Seems simple, right? Presumably, unlike the other flower plant enemies, my best guess as to why this one was cut would be because of its size. In the Sleepy Subcon Time Rift, you can actually see this plant enemy among the pink and yellow ones in the laboratory level of the rift. From here, we can see just how large this enemy was going to be. In a level like Subcon Forest, something of this size chasing Hat Kid would most likely force the developers to thin the forest in order to keep it from getting stuck on trees. For that reason, it's pretty clear as to why this was cut from the game. Ladies and gentlemen, take a look at this bush! Just kidding, it's a cat. They call this the bush cat, also known as the rough patch. According to the cutting room floor, this enemy's model was originally found in the alpha build of the game, but lacked any textures or animations. In the final release of the game, however, this model has both textures and animations. A pretty simple concept: the rough patch would appear as a bush, but when approached would jump out as a cat and chase and attack the player. There were 2 interesting things I had noticed while finding information for this enemy that I have not seen documented anywhere else. First off, there was a neutral/happy face that the rough patch would have used while it was in its idle animation, not attacking the player. This makes it look much more cat-like. Along with this, the rough patch was also going to play a warning noise that would alert players if they were near it so not to disturb it, accompanied by a much more frenzied rustling animation. The noise appears to be a slightly modified cat purring sound. I'll play it in its entirety now. At the end of the day, it appears that the rough patch was going to play a role very similar to that of the headless statues seen in the final game, albeit with some more gameplay than chasing the player without the player even realizing they're there in the first place. Now, we're almost done with all these cut enemies. However, before we finish up, I have one request for you. Take a look at this shroom. Shroom? Shroom? Shroom. Yeah, take a look at it. Don't know if you can figure out by the name, but shroom comes from shroom and bomb, so you could probably guess how they would have worked. These fellows will have crawled out of the ground when the player moves past them and chase them until they explode. Sounds kind of similar, right? Well, if you remember the birdhouse peak from Chapter 4, those eggs that chase the player are quite literally referred to as Shrom eggs. You may be thinking to yourself, why? Do they reuse the code? Well, let me tell you, they reuse more than just the code. The Shrom eggs on the birdhouse peak are quite literally scaled up Shroms with eggs plastered over them, and if one were to use the camera in order to take a look underneath the egg, you'll find the original model still intact, with face textures and all. So there you have it. Those are all the cut enemies I could find for the Subcon Forest. Now, let's move on to the big guys. Oh, but before then, there's one important thing that I've been neglecting to share with all of you. I bet you all were wondering what the music I've been playing was. Well, lucky as we are, because the original composer for the game, circa 2012 and 2013, Eric Gleiser, had, presumably with Jonas's permission, uploaded almost all of his cut soundtrack onto his SoundCloud in June of this year, allowing us finally to hear what his renditions of the game's soundtrack would have been like. Ironically, Gleiser's Welcome to Mafia Town has had more plays in the last 4 months than the Welcome to Mafia Town and the official Gears for Breakfast channel has had views in the past 3 years. Just goes to show that a lot of people are very nostalgic about the old development videos Jonas used to upload. I know I was. I had the track stuck in my head for 5 years. Literally. Anyway, in a bit of irony, the only 2 tracks that we know exist that Gleiser didn't upload are Subcon related, and can be heard partly in the Music of a Hat in Time video from May 2013. They are Subcon Forest Lost and Toilet of Doom. Subcon Forest Lost appears to be mostly the same as Depths of the Dark Forest, which was the on-path version of the Subcon Forest theme, with the difference being that the theremin-like sound is replaced with echoing, fading beeps, and the strings and background noise seem to disappear aside from the rattling and creepy noises of which I'm not sure what instrument was used to make them. Anyway, I'm going to give demos of each of the Subcon themes that Gleiser had composed prior to him leaving Gears for Breakfast. Along with these, we also have the theme that was used for the Times End bookstore/credits in the alpha composed by MP2. This theme was titled in the files as the Subcon Forest _masked.og and was presumably going to be played in some sort of event in the forest, most likely, as the name suggests, when Hat Kid has a fox mask on, or perhaps sometime after acquiring it. We've already covered the whole Hat Kid singing about Moonjumper thing in great detail, so I'm just going to play the music. While listening to it, listen very carefully, because the theme has very clear leitmotifs to Eric Gleiser's Subcon Forest theme, making this the only remnant of Gleiser's work to ever be officially released for sale by Gears for Breakfast, as the theme is available on the B-side soundtrack. Here at Wolf Clock Productions, my main goal with Betafied is to educate users and come up with comprehensive and reasonable theories on cut content. If I mess up and misinform users, I have to own up to it, and for that reason, I have to apologize to you all. In the last episode, I stated that I believed that the dwellers within the Subcon village that were being strung up in the Chapter 2 trailer were being captured by the Snatcher. I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. In reality, this was a piece of lore about the Moonjumper that I was unaware of. One of the late Prince's abilities would be to capture and brainwash creatures by stringing them up like marionette puppets through these Twilight Princess-esque portals in the sky. As shown earlier when talking about Timmy's cameo in the forest, the Moonjumper would have been causing havoc in the forest by brainwashing the inhabitants of the village. In addition to this piece of concept art by Shane Frost depicts Hat Kid being strung up by an alternative design for the Moonjumper. Again, here's another piece of art that depicts the Moonjumper more closely to his in-game counterpart with some marionette strings raining down from his fingers. Unfortunately, I couldn't find enough information that I could publicly share to make this video the Moonjumper Part 2 that a number of people had been asking about. However, even if I don't have enough lore information to saturate this section, I do have some additional information about the Moonjumper that may as well be worth sharing. You know this part of the forest with the creepy half-house and the floating furniture and fireplace? This was originally going to be the Moonjumper's portion of the forest. Behind the trees to the back of this area sits the cut-in-half tower that Hatboy said that he headcanoned to be the Flower Girl's kingdom. This area specifically, with the giant teacup, was where the player would have been able to meet the Moonjumper, according to the information that we know currently. It's difficult to be certain that this is an exact position, as the only in-game footage that directly shows the Moonjumper is from a point in time so early on in the forest's development that it is next to impossible to locate an accurate position. And all the other screenshots throughout development that show the Moonjumper only show him from a distance, and usually in some sort of haze. However, proof exists that this was the Moonjumper's home right on top of the fireplace. This crown. So huzzah, more proof that the Moonjumper was the original prince. Well, I mean, a dev already confirmed it, so I guess we don't really need more proof, but hey, nothing like a little icing on the cake, huh? stated previously, the 2D Snatcher was originally going to be seen projected onto a rock near the top of the path. Although it's difficult to pinpoint, going frame by frame in the alpha release trailer, we can see the Snatcher's two-dimensional smile in the corner of the frame for a split second. As well as this, as stated near the beginning of the video, in the clip of Mustache Girl and Subcon, we can see the side of the rock that the Snatcher is going to be projected on. Interestingly enough, it appears that the Snatcher's rock later in development was completely different to his early development. In the 3 earliest pieces of footage of the Snatcher, he is seen on a large, bulbous piece of terrain, whereas this clip appears to affix him onto a flat, stone-textured rock. This makes sense, as the path became much more tight in development and a large piece of dirt would simply get in the way of level design. Unfortunately, there's not much information to go on about how the dynamic with the Snatcher would have gone originally, other than that he was very mischievous, conniving, and more of a direct antagonist to the player. This is made evident by the dialogue he's seen having in both old footage and on the 3rd floor of the manor, not to mention the fact that he's a direct hindrance to the player in the manor by stealing the key to the attic and running around. In terms of fighting the Snatcher, it's not known if there would have been a true boss fight with him, at least not in the same style as other bosses. However, there are a multitude of hints as to how he would have been damaged, which leads me to believe that, had there been a boss fight, it would have been much more puzzle-based than combat-based. First off, the Snatcher states quite directly that the only thing that can hurt him is fire, in his written lines. He also mentions the fire spirits by name. Since originally the fire spirits were not going to have been used to block off certain parts of the forest, as the forest was originally completely open from the start, meaning they would have most likely played a part in defeating the Snatcher. As well as this, is also seen in gameplay in both the alpha and beta that the Snatcher would have been harmed by bright lights, as the entire mechanic of the 3rd floor revolved around damaging the Snatcher by timing timed lights to hit him. Now then, that's what we have on early Snatcher. Let's get into late development Snatcher, because I have some of that for all of you too. Well, when I say some of that, it's really just one thing, but it counts, and it's kind of neat, so I'm gonna put it here anyway. Let's go back for a minute to the Toilet of Doom. Not the early one with the puzzles and stuff, the one that we know today that the player gets to fight right away. Well, this is a little something learned from the Ask the Devs channel on the A Hat in Time Discord before it was deleted. One of the devs, most likely Haboy, although I can't be certain because they deleted it without warning us so we couldn't say anything, confirmed that the reason why the Snatcher's boss battle feels so short was because the Toilet of Doom and the Snatcher were originally going to be fought back to back. What would have happened was the Toilet of Doom would have been defeated, fade to white, same as in the final game, the timepiece would appear. But when Hat Kid were to walk up to it, the Snatcher would stop her and the Snatcher's battle would begin. Kind of helps give reason as to why there's just a timepiece floating there at the start of the level in the final game, but you can easily see why the developers thought that the battles were difficult enough to have to be split into 2 different timepieces. Anyway, that's everything I have saved about the Snatcher, so let's move right on. We only have, 3-4 more sections to go? I hope you guys knew when I took such a long hiatus that this is going to be a long video. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for a little segment that I like to call Post-Release Cut Content. Now, you may be wondering, what exactly is Post-Release Cut Content? Well, Post-Release Cut Content is content that was cut post-release of the game. It's Post-Release Cut Content, and as it just so happens, we have 2 little bits of this in the Subcon Forest. These are things that, if one were to go back to the release version 1.0, they'd still be able to find in the game, but in the current build are no longer available. The first piece of post-release cut content we've got is this little dweller that's seen at the start of the chapter. This dweller was the only one that talks to the player in the entire game, and only had 2 lines. Interestingly, this dweller uses the same sound effect that plays when you talk to the Snatcher. Anyway, this dweller was cut in the modding update that released last year. The second piece of post-release cut content is in the village itself, and comes in the form of the maskless flying dwellers that were originally there for aesthetic effect. These were removed in the bug fix update following the DLC update, with the reasoning being that new players who just learned the cherry bomb mechanic could be confused and try to use one of these dwellers in order to activate said bomb instead of a functional dweller. Oddly enough, although I remember very specifically reading this in a patch note, I just can't seem to find it anywhere now. But sure enough, taking a look around, there's not a single maskless dweller to be found floating above the village. While we're on the topic of dwellers in the village, there's also some lines from a dweller that was going to act as a tutorial to show the player how to use the cherry bombs by mentioning that the Snatcher is a jerk and how he keeps forcing dwellers into cherries, then blowing them up. Unfortunately, information about cut missions of the Subcon Forest is scarce. However, there are at least 2 cut missions that I could successfully find and source for Subcon. The first of the 2 is seen in the Chapter 2 trailer, and is titled, Save My Trapped Friend. The objectives are as follows: break the ice, and make the flowers bloom. According to Haboy during his developer commentary stream, he states that the path leading to the Toilet of Doom was originally going to have an ice wall, which would be broken in the same way as it is in the final game, followed by a flower wall, which the Snatcher would say the player wouldn't be able to break by conventional means. He also states that this would eventually lead on to an iteration of the Toilet of Doom.
There was actually, here's a fun fact. So I think some people knew this, but at one point this section here was blocked by 2 walls. One was an ice wall, the other was a rose. Well, I don't know if it was a rose, but it was a pink flower with lots of thorns kind of wall. And you blew up the ice wall. That was the puzzle. And then after that, the Snatcher would be like fire or ice or whatever. It doesn't work on this thorned wall, so you're going to have to get something stronger, I think he said. So that's implying that you needed to get something later on, I believe, and that led to the toilet boss. There was a lot of freedom to this chapter in general, I think.
The other known mission is one I mostly refer to as Drunk Dwellers. In the beta, there's a localization file titled Subcon_drunkard, which contains the information about what Hat Kid was to do during this mission. Here's the file in its entirety, as read by yours truly.
Hey there, kid. Ha ha! Barry, you're gonna ask a kid to pick up your tab? Looky here, kid. We're miserable old farts just having a good time. Not much going on when you're a forest dweller, you know. We drink a lot, sure, but it's nothing bad when compared to the other dwellers. They're miserable, we're just having a good time. After about 100 years, our keg is about to run dry. Can you look around the forest and turn on the valves to fill our keg? I could have used another drink, is all I'm asking for. Go on then, have a look. We'll make it worth your time, right, boys? Aye! Hey, kid, bring us a drink, will you? Just turn the valves about the forest, it'll fill the keg. She did it! Another round, boys! Tell you what, Larry, what's going on with the wife and kids and that? They miss me, Betty, they miss me good, but I'll be heading back home once me belly's full. Ha ha, Larry, you son of a gun, you know we don't even have bellies. Say, Larry, aren't your family dwellers well? Aye, just as miserable as I. Another drink! Cheers! Barry, did you see? What happened to Terry? He must have finally gotten drunk after 100 years. Ha! That's Terry, alright. But now the old Terry's gone, who's got to take care of his dog? Don't be silly, Larry. His dog's been fine on its own for over 100 years. Come on, then. Bottoms up. You know I have to go when my belly's full. Look at that. Another drink for the 2 of us. Bottoms up. Terry! Guess it's just me left. Ha ha, it feels weird not having the boys about. Silly people may think I have a problem, just drinking here by myself. Well, bottoms up, boys! Oh, right. I have to get going when my belly is full anyways. There comes another drink. Just need another drink. My belly isn't full yet. I'm not like the boys, I can handle a drink. Cheers, you old fart!
Interesting, right? It appears that at one point there would have been valves located around the forest, most likely the same style as the valves seen in Heating Up Mafia Town. As well as this, it appears that Hat Kid would have to have activated at least 4 different valves in order to complete the mission. According to Haboy in the Ask the Devs channel before it was deleted, the Dwellers were actually the Dweller Mafia, and it is unknown if they would have remained so or if these were just temporary models. Finally, before we wrap everything up, let's take a quick look at things that were cut that don't fit any of the other sections, as well as changes seen throughout development. I'm going to try to keep this relatively brief. Vanessa's Manor. The earliest picture of the manor was from the announcement that Chapter 2 had begun development and that they were working on Queen Vanessa. This picture shows the bottom floor hallway using textures from Mafia headquarters. It's noteworthy that there is no door towards where the sign is pointing like there is in the final game. The next iteration is seen as the background footage for Jonas's "We Got Greenlit" announcement video. It is worth noting that Eric Gleiser's music is still used in this video. Also note that the water in the basement is taken from the Mafia town due to it being blue instead of the brownish green that is seen in the other builds. It is also worth noting just how many objects are untextured in this version. The next version is going to be the Halloween 2013 trailer version. This version is much further in development than the previous one, but there are still many things to note. There's an untextured half-cylinder next to the bookcase that houses the key. The second floor still uses the first floor's wall textures. The shot of Vanessa's room shows that the walls are still blue, as well as her vanity beside her bed being untextured. Not much can be made out of the third floor, as the entire portion that is seen shows Queen Vanessa chasing Hat Kid, therefore putting the overlay effect on the video. However, we can see that this hallway is empty. The walls still use the first floor textures as well. The last 6 frames show some objects on the left and right side of where the camera is headed, but it's not clear what these might be. The 2 doorways that are seen in the third floor in the Alpha and Beta are still visible, so this hallway is definitely the third floor. Next up, we have the build that the crack textures and cube maps found in the Alpha and Beta are from. From what can be seen, the hallway on the first floor is still missing most model textures, and the basement, although now using darker water, still has bright blue water droplets. The basement door is still untextured, much like in the greenlit announcement video. Yet again, it appears that the second floor still uses first floor blue wall textures rather than the later green ones. It can also be seen that the door to the third floor is missing. Following this, we have the Alpha build, our first playable build of the manor. Some noteworthy things are that there are multiple different colored wall textures now, coming in blue, green, and orange. A texture for a red wall exists, but I'm not sure that it goes used. The basement now has a brownish-greenish water that is used in the final game, but is still rather empty, as it lacks the ice seen in the beta in the final game. The second floor now has green hallway wall textures, and the third floor now uses the orange ones. Now on to the beta build. The basement has seen some significant upgrades since the alpha, with the addition of some pipes, shading, and, most importantly, large ice crystals scattered throughout. These are seen on the first and second floors as well, in order to go with the new ice theme with Queen Vanessa as opposed to the previously used stone theme. Onto the second floor, the walls are now decorated with many scratch marks left by Vanessa. It can be seen that even in this late build of the game, the cube maps are still outdated, and from a build that predates the alpha. The bathroom has been redone and looks much less blocky and much more complete, with the only real difference from this and the final version being the frozen body in the corner, and the fact that this cookie behind the toilet becomes a ghost cookie, only visible with a Dweller mask on in the final game. Now, on to the major changes. The third floor has been almost completely reworked aesthetically. Instead of the orange walls, and yes, I know they look red, but the textures are still called orange, we are greeted with walls lined with many newspaper clippings and articles, coated in scratches and writing from Queen Vanessa, mostly all pointing to her obsessiveness and abuse towards her prince. A little thing worth noting here, by the way, a piece of graffiti that is seen on this floor as well as in multiple other places in the final game has an unused layer that depicts the moonjumper next to this weird grumpy thing that is also visible in one of the rooms on the third floor. Just thought it was worth mentioning. The third floor now has some cube maps for reflections on the doorknobs and grandfather clock, but it appears that the cube map is outdated and from a point in between the alpha and beta builds, as the walls are orange. Also worth noting on this cube map is that the 2D Snatcher is visible on the wall. One last noteworthy thing on the third floor in the beta is that this creepy vibrating eye is seen on the wall of the room furthest to the left. More so, it can only be seen if the player goes into first-person view and looks directly at the wall. Now, there is one more known change that is seen in a single screenshot, which comes from sometime relatively shortly before the game's release, that depicts the third floor. Remember that creepy vibrating eye I was talking about earlier? Well, this screenshot was posted by Habboy in October of last year, which, clearly, depicts the entirety of the hallway on the third floor covered in these eyes with a violent red hue over the entire room. As a direct quote from Habboy, "But yeah, that's what I whipped up before I was like, nah, game's out soon, CBA. For all us Americans, apparently CBA means can't be arsed. Learn something new every day, huh?" Anyway, the 2 reports about this picture was that it was going to be part of some new puzzle on the third floor that Habboy didn't get to finish, or it may have just been part of Habboy's ARG that he had done leading up to the release of the game. Problem being, both of these reports come from Haboy himself. So... presumably it's going to be used for an actual thing though, so we'll leave it at that. The last version of Vanessa's manor we have comes from the released version of the game, so I don't need to cover it. You guys all have the game, look at it yourself. I gotta wrap this video up, capiche? Now, next up, we have the Subcon well. Conveniently, for my own sake, there are only 2 builds of this to explore. The beta build and the final build. That being said, there's some extra info to be known. First thing that got changed was the watercolor. According to Haboy, there was a point in time where the water was green, with the idea of it being toxic. This was later changed to purple, as seen in the beta. According to Haboy, it's still purple in the final game, but color filters and stuff make it appear as it's blue. Anyway, aside from this, there are very few changes that came to this level throughout the game's development. In the beta build, there are no spider enemies, as they didn't exist at this time. There's only one layer to the music, so the drums never kick in. One of the pipes leads off to a hidden time rift. The dwellers are replaced with glowing tombstones that produce the same effect when a cherry is brought near them. Now, finally, the changes to the forest itself. This section is going to be quite difficult, as, at least while this video is being made, there are no available builds of the forest itself available to the public, or, more importantly, to me. However, with pre-release footage and developer commentaries, we can spot some things, so let's just run through them. The earliest footage of the forest comes from Jonas's commentary from 2013 and the Chapter 2 trailer from around the same time. This footage is very unrevealing, but we can see that the forest looks almost completely unlike anything we have in the final game. Starting off, all the trees are temporary models and seem to be very scarce. As well as this, there appears to be a very large cliffside near the starting area where the fire spirits are. There's no such cliffside that's this tall anywhere in any other known footage. The ground appears to be much more flat in the forest than it is in the final game, with less slopes, and the Toilet of Doom is just an empty area connected at the end of the village. All in all, almost everything seen here is different than in the final game. Next up, we have some screenshots of the forest during the alpha stages of the game. The most noticeable thing about the forest that unfortunately never made it into the final game is the eyes in the fog. Who knows why these were cut? You can actually see these in the pit that leads up to Vanessa's manor in the final game. In addition to them, the ground is still covered in Wind Waker grass, and the lighting seems to be more of a greenish blue than it does purple for most of the forest in the final game. In a few of these screenshots, you can just make out the moon jumper in the distance. Now, on to beta screenshots. The forest now resembles its final game equivalent much more than previously. Some of the most noticeable things about these screenshots are the pink plants that are visible in many places, and the ground texture is a brown dirt texture rather than grass. As well as this screenshot of the Subcon village shows that the Moonjumper was, at this point, using his new pixel particles rather than his old ones. We'll get to that in just a minute. That's just about everything I can find about the forest itself. Now let's talk about some of the changes that happened to some of the characters and other objects before the final game. The Watching Eyes at one point had a placeholder model that depicted a much more realistic looking eye as opposed to the eye in the skull that's seen in the final game. The light plants obviously had evolved into the pink and yellow plants before being removed entirely. On the topic of changes before being cut, let's take a look at the Moonjumper. Well, his appearance itself never changes. However, the pixel particles around him changed from the prototype and beta build of the game. In the prototype, his particles were colored with his colors, while later in development, the colors were inverted in such a way that the interiors of the pixels were black while their outlines retained his colors. Well, I believe that wraps everything up. That was everything I could find about the Subcon Force development. I'd like to give some huge shoutouts to my Hat in Time Cut content community, especially towards Miss Switch for her archival of the alpha and beta builds of the game, and Clone5184 both for helping me run the Discord and for finding and archiving a lot of files I wouldn't have been able to find myself. If it weren't for you guys, I definitely would not have been able to make all of this. However, I have to give the biggest thank you to all of you guys for sticking with me all this time. The entire Hat in Time Betafied project wouldn't be possible without viewer support, and the fact that I've managed to make these videos by themselves, let alone archive every development video I've been able to find on the internet, comes from the knowledge that viewers like you are interested in seeing more. If you enjoy Betafied and would like to see more videos like this, feel free to share the video. It really does help me out, and as always, feel free to let me know what your thoughts are and what you think I should do next. If you'd like to join the Hat in Time Cut content Discord or keep up to date with things, I've provided some links in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, I'll see you guys all in the next episode.